If I could get everybody's attention, we're going to go ahead and get started with our meeting. You don't have to find a seat because I'm going to ask you to stand right back up. We're going to go ahead and eat first. But I want to welcome everyone out. It's a great honor to have the United States Senator here with us today, Rand Paul. I appreciate the other chambers partnering with us, the Johnson County Area Chamber, Paintsville-Johnson County Chamber, the Floyd County Chamber of Commerce, and the Letcher County Chamber of Commerce. At the end of the day, the businesses in Eastern Kentucky realize that we've got to work together to keep moving the region forward. I think the attendance here today, the groups that are here today that are represented, shows great support in what we believe and what we're trying to do. So I thank you for being here, and I appreciate all that you do. Again, I just want to reiterate, each time I get up, I like to restate what we believe, and that's the fact that for Eastern Kentucky to continue growing, we don't believe there's any competition from within, but rather as a region we're competing with other areas of the state. And that's what our regional chamber is about, and that's what we keep pushing forward and trying to do with our events, with our programming, with all of our all the actions that we take. We want it to fall under that strategic plan. So with that being said, we have a couple events coming up. I just want to give you notice of those. On January 31st, we're going to be having a town hall forum with the legislators from Pike County. That would be Representative Leslie Combs, Representative W. Keith Hall, and Senator Ray Jones. We're working on some other town hall forums with the other legislators in the other areas, working on calendar and scheduling for those, so I'll keep you posted. On another note, the One Eastern Kentucky Economic Development Luncheon that we did in November, we're doing our second installment of that in February. On February 4th, we will have Lieutenant Governor Jerry Abramson down to speak again to a group. So that'll be February 4th at Jenny Wiley State Resort Park. We'll be having that there again. So I appreciate your attendance, and I'm going to ask, definitely want to thank our sponsor this afternoon, Lightyear Network Solutions. We appreciate them for seeing the support and the importance of the chamber. And we got Frank here with us today. Dahlhair, you'll be hearing from here in a moment, but we appreciate their commitment to the chamber and their support. I want to introduce next our chairman, current chairman of the Southeast Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. This is his second stint as chairman. His last one was the Pike County Chamber chair. And we really appreciate his commitment, a longtime board member of the Chamber of Commerce, multiple different chambers, lots of community work, a great business mind, a great friend and partner. We appreciate him. But Mr. Danny Van Hoos, current chairman of the Southeast Kentucky Chamber.
Think it was almost evaluation time or something or other. But I do thank you. It is an honor for me to represent the Southeast Kentucky Chamber of Commerce and to be here and be a part of something. I'm always encouraged since we've started this regional chamber initiative, and I'm always encouraged when the other chambers become involved as well. You got the Paintsville-Johnson County Chamber, the Letcher Chamber, and the Floyd Chamber. Working together, there's nothing that we can't accomplish. For years, we've basically been handed whatever it is that the powers that be want us to have, and we've either accepted it or complained about it or whatever, but that's basically how it is. But collectively, now representing 216,000 people in Southeast Kentucky, and working with all of these organizations, working with a unified approach, it does give us the leverage to be able to not only continue to ask for things, but have a little bit more ability to get them. And it's an honor to work with these people. So, you know, at this time, you can't do things in this world without great partners and great sponsors, and certainly Lightyear Network Solutions has been great to work with and has meant a lot to this region. And today they are sponsoring this luncheon here with Senator Paul, and we're very pleased to have them on board. Representing Lightyear today is Mr. Frank Dahlhair, and he's the regional sales manager for Lightyear. And he'll tell you a little bit about Lightyear and introduce our speaker. But at this time, I'd like for you to make welcome Mr. Frank Dahlhair.
Now, the reason we're all here, I'm not going to speak off the cuff because I usually don't do well, but if you're looking for someone, and you want to say thinks outside the box, but really, since when did commonsensical thinking be outside the box? I mean, you want people who think with common sense. And if that's where we are in Washington today, that's considered outside the box, so be it. But our next speaker, Dr. Rand Paul, is the junior United States Senator for Kentucky. Elected in 2010, he has proven to be an outspoken champion for constitutional liberties and fiscal responsibility, and a warrior against government overreach. Among his first legislative proposals, cutting $500 billion in federal spending and a plan to balance the federal budget in just 5 years. He has introduced similar bills with growing support. In the Senate, Rand serves on the following committees: Foreign Relations, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, Homeland Security and Government Affairs, and Small Business. A graduate of Duke University School of Medicine, Rand was a practicing ophthalmologist in Bowling Green for 17 years. In 1995, he founded the Southern Kentucky Lions Eye Clinic, an organization that provides eye exams and surgery to needy families and individuals. Today, even as a U.S. Senator, he continues to provide pro bono eye surgery to Kentuckians in need of care. Rand has been a vocal advocate for term limits, a balanced budget amendment, a Read the Bills Act, and an audit of the Federal Reserve. He has gained prominence for his independent positions on many political issues. Rand has been married for over 20 years to Kelly Ashby of Russellville, Kentucky, and they have 3 sons. He is the son of former Republican Congressman and presidential candidate Ron Paul of Texas. Let's please welcome to Pikeville our U.S. Senator, Rand Paul.
Thank you. It's good to be back. We're glad we didn't have to slide through ice or snow yet. We may be sliding through it on the way back to Bowling Green this afternoon, but the weather was with us. About the turn of the last century, there was a chaplain for the Senate, and he was asked, do you pray for the senators? Do you pray for the Senate? And he said, well, I've been here a while, and I pray for the people. And there is some truth to that. You do need some prayers because often they seem to ignore your wishes, often they seem to ignore the problems, and often they just seem to sort of lurch from deadline to deadline, and you scratch your head and you say, well, what were they doing in between times? Why did they have to wait till the 11th hour, the 12th hour to get something done? I've traveled around the state a lot in the last couple years, and when I was reaching the end of the campaign, I stopped in Litchfield, Kentucky one day, and a woman, this is a true story, a woman came up to me and she grabbed me by the hair and she said, oh, I just wanted to see if it was a toupee or not. And I said, hey lady, just give me a break, I'm having a bad hair day. So anyway, I thought that was behind me, and last week I was in Israel, not at your expense. I paid my own way. Taxpayers didn't pay for this. But I was in Israel, and I was saying a prayer at the West Wall, which is if anybody's been there, the West Wall is a very famous, long existing part of where the temple originally stood. And there were, like everything else, your picture can appear anywhere, even whether you know it or not. And so it's online, and the tradition is to wear a yarmulke. I'm not Jewish, but to wear that when you're praying at the wall. So I'm praying at the wall, and there's a picture of me on it. And I look on the internet, and what's the first comment from some wiseacre? It says, oh yeah, he's got a yarmulke tacked onto his rug. So what I want to make sure that you know is whether you agree with me or disagree with me, whether you think I'm genuine or not, the hair, it's genuine. So I'm not making that up. But we really do seem to lurch from deadline to deadline. We had this thing that we're calling the fiscal cliff. And you wonder, well, I guess we prepared for it, or we must not have known it was coming, right? That's why we couldn't take care of it till the end. Well, how long did we have to take care of this? How long did we know the fiscal cliff was approaching? 10 years. When they passed the new tax rates under Bush in 2001, 2003, we had about 10 years to prepare because they automatically sunsetted it. The tax rates were going to expire. So when did we figure out the solution? Did we talk about it and come up with some meaningful solutions? No, we figured out the solution 10 years, 1 hour, and 36 minutes into the deadline. So what happened is we were having this debate back and forth, and you say, well, what is the fiscal cliff? If we're going over a cliff, certainly that's not a good thing, right? So what was the fiscal cliff? Fiscal cliff was essentially two things. Although they talked mostly about taxes, it was also about some spending cuts called a sequester, an automatic across-the-board cuts. But the main thing everybody talked about was a tax cut. And they said, well, everybody's taxes will go up. That was the sunsetting of the old tax rates were going to go up, and it would be bad. In fact, people made the analogy, they said it would be like drowning. And it's like, well, drowning's not a good thing, right? So that means that if your taxes go up, that's like drowning. So I guess your taxes going up is not a good thing. But they said, well, we only want to raise the taxes on certain people. So it's a bad thing for everyone's taxes to go up, but it's a good thing for some people's taxes to go up. It didn't really make too much sense to me. And so people said, well, it's like drowning. And so what we're going to do is we're going to save 99% of the people or 98% of the people. Most people in this room, myself included, probably are not in the top 1%. But why would it be a good thing to save all of us and not save everybody? And aren't we interconnected to those people who do make a lot of money, who are in the top 1%? If your son makes $35,000 a year and sells Mercedes, you think it matters to him or her whether or not she sells another car next year? Who buys a Mercedes? People who are wealthy. We're interconnected to them. They've tried this before. We tried this. We passed a yacht tax. Anybody in here have a yacht? I don't want to offend anybody. All right. We passed a yacht tax, a special 5% tax on people. You say, well, they're rich. They can absorb it. Well, you know what happened? They went to the Bahamas to buy their yachts, and the people making the yachts who make $50,000 a year and $60,000 a year, they lost their jobs making the yachts. So it affects the rich people too. It doesn't bother them so much, but they do change their behavior and they buy less stuff. Or what if a rich person has a company with 100 employees? Is it more or less likely to hire the 101st employee if you raise their taxes? See, we have to think about this because as a country we want to compete. As a region you want to compete. The corporate income tax in America is 35%. In Canada it's now 15%. Money goes where it's welcome. In Illinois, they're raising taxes because they're bankrupt because they spend money hand over fist. But where's the money going? Money's leaving Illinois and going to other states because the taxes are too high. We compete with Tennessee. Tennessee has no income tax. Tennessee's a right-to-work state, so we're competing all the time with other states. We now have Indiana to the north of us that is also a right-to-work state. We're competing all the time with other states, but also with other countries. So we have to realize that if your government's running a deficit, that is bad, and we should do something about it. Revenue's half the equation. It's spending and revenue. You got to make them match again. But in order to get them to make them match, you have to say, well, how do you get more revenue? And you have to ask a little deeper question than just raising tax rates. Will raising tax rates actually raise more revenue? Well, there have been times when we've actually done the opposite, when we've lowered tax rates and gotten more revenue. In the 1920s, we lowered rates significantly and we got more revenue. We did it again in the 1960s under Kennedy. We lowered rates and we got more revenue. We did it under Reagan. We lowered rates and got more revenue. What did we get? We got economic growth. We all said we want growth and we want jobs. You don't get growth and jobs by raising tax rates. You actually sometimes don't get more revenue. 2 years ago in Britain, they raised the top rate significantly on millionaires. Guess what they got? Less millionaires. People either left the country, made less money, or diverted their income to try to stay below the tax threshold. And so really it doesn't necessarily work to raise tax rates if your goal is to get more revenue. The other possibility is that maybe lowering rates gets more revenue. It happened in the 20s, the 60s, the 80s. Actually, even the Bush tax cuts in 2001, 2003, most people don't realize this, we got more revenue. And you say, well, the deficits have gotten worse. Yeah, because the spending has gotten worse. Spending is out of control. We used to spend about 20% of our GDP. $1 in $5 was spent in Washington. Now it's $1 in $4. It's 25% of GDP. Spending as a percentage of your overall economy is going up. That's why your deficits are worse. But the interesting thing is when they reduced the rates in 2001, 2003, more revenue came in. And guess what? When more revenue came in, the rich paid a higher percentage of that revenue. And so really all the things the president says he's for actually occur when you lower rates. So really we have to continue this argument because it makes a difference. How do we thrive as a country? How do you thrive as a region and state? How do we do this? We have to encourage business. And when I go into a community, what I'll ask, or if anybody wants to ask or tell me is, how do I help you? What can I do to make your business better? If you've got somebody sitting in the audience who employs 50 people, what do I do to get them to hire 55 people? It shouldn't be, what do I do to squeeze more money out of them? If you have a rich business owner here in your audience today, and I say, well, why don't I go to Lightyear, the company, and squeeze more money out of them? Then we'll have more money for roads. Well, if I do, you'll have less jobs and they'll make less money. What we need to do is how do you encourage Lightyear to hire more people, to become a bigger business? We should have a government that wants to be friendly to business. So we go through all of this and we get to it and people are saying, well, the whole exchange and the whole deal will be, when we go through this fiscal cliff, is we'll reform spending. Well, the number one driver of spending is entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So what did the president say? He said, that's off limits. We don't have enough time to talk about it. So we lurch from deadline to deadline, and then at the last moment, we don't. You're right, we don't. But why is nobody talking about it in between the deadlines? Why don't we have a committee to study Social Security, a committee to study Medicare, a committee to study tax reform? Now, I'm not standing up here and saying the rich shouldn't pay taxes. They should. If there are rich people paying 0%, obviously they need to be paying. Same with corporations. There are corporations that haven't paid any because of special loopholes. So I would get rid of loopholes. I'm more than happy to get rid of deductions that seem unfair and allow certain people not to pay any. But really the truth of the matter is the top 1% pay on average 29% in income tax, which if you're not in the top 1%, most people here, myself included, when you average it out, pay less than that. So the rich do pay most of the income tax. If you look at what the rich pay as a percentage of the income tax, top 1% pay 40% of the income tax. The top 10%, if you go $200,000 up, pay 70% of the income tax. If you make $70,000 and above, you pay 96% of the income tax. So we have a very progressive income tax. It isn't that the rich aren't paying their fair share. If anything, it's the opposite. The rich pay more than their fair share in our country. But really, it shouldn't be about that. It shouldn't be about vilifying one group for the other. It should be, how do we get our economy to grow? Our economy is languishing. We're growing at 1.5%. That's why we don't have the jobs we need. It's also why we don't have the revenue. So people say, oh, well, the Bush tax cuts, when you invoked those in 2001, 2003, revenue went down. Well, it didn't. Revenue stayed the same or went up for about 4 years. When did revenue decline? When did tax revenue become less? About 2000, 2008, 2007, 2008, when the recession hit. We don't have enough tax revenue because we don't have economic growth. We don't have the economic engine of growth. When's the last time we had really robust economic growth, just tremendous growth? Back in the late 80s, we had a couple years where we grew at 6 and 7%. That was in the Reagan years when we lowered taxes, and you actually ended up with more revenue. Now, people say, well, Reagan had deficits too. Yeah, because we never can cut spending. Spending is where the problem is. And you say, well, spending is all essential. We can't cut any more spending. We've cut to the bone. Well, I'll give you a couple items that you might not agree with as far as spending. Last year, we spent $3 million to study monkeys on methamphetamine. Now, does anybody here that think that monkeys probably don't act crazy on methamphetamine? We've seen humans. What it does to humans? Do we really need to give monkeys methamphetamine? $3 million. We spent $300,000 studying what a rattlesnake will do with a robotic squirrel that doesn't wag its tail. Seems they couldn't get a squirrel to volunteer because the squirrels all wag their tail. So they wanted to see what would happen when the squirrel didn't wag its tail. So they spent $300,000 to develop a robotic squirrel that didn't wag its tail and see what a rattlesnake would do. A rattlesnake bites the squirrel that doesn't wag its tail. That cost you $300,000. We spent about $1 million trying to determine what kind of menu people would like to have when we colonize Mars. $1 million. Now, and if you've got a child that needs something to do, have them volunteer for these studies. You got $5,000 stipend. They had decided they had to go to Hawaii to study this. So they were on some rocky surface in Hawaii that was supposed to simulate Mars and make you think of what you would eat when you were on Mars. And you know what the really big surprise that came out of this $1 million study was? People decided they'd probably like to eat pizza when they're on Mars. So that was $1 million. Now, you may have heard the big hurricane came up in the Northeast, Sandy, and they want money for it. So you hear all their politicians bloviating, saying, give us our money, give it to us now. We want it now. We don't want it yesterday. We want all $60 billion that we might spend over 4 or 5 years. They're only estimated to spend $9 billion next year. Do you know what's included in the $60 billion they want? There's money for Alaskan fisheries. That's a long way from New England to Alaska. I don't know how the Alaskan fisheries have anything to do with the Sandy storm. They also put stuff in for 5 states that Republicans represent, because they wanted to get Republicans to vote for this. So 5 states got Sandy relief that are nowhere near New England. They also have money in there for a performance art festival. $700,000. It's called the River to River Festival, and this is in New York City each year. Last year they had a knot tying exposition there. You're glad your money's going, right, up to New York for a knot tying exposition. They had a Occupy Wall Street photo exhibit that you're paying for. But my favorite one they have at the Performance Art Festival is they have something called a flash mob. Flash mob is where you tell everybody to show up at one time, and you're supposed to have your iPod with you and you play the same song. $700,000 of your money in the Sandy relief are going towards this performance art thing. There was money. We have a $3.8 trillion budget each year. There's money throughout the whole thing. You could knock 10% of the whole budget across the board, and you would still probably be able to give out everything that you really intended to. You just cut out the waste. I have one bill that would actually try to get to this. It would say that if you're in the Department of Energy and you manage a $12 million budget, it would give you bonuses based on what you save. You'd still have to do what you're supposed to be doing, but at the end of the year, if you had $1 million left over, you'd get a bonus, a significant bonus. I'd pay them a lot to save money. Now what do we have in government? If you manage $12 million and you have $1 million left in December, what are you supposed to do? Spend it as fast as you can or you'll not get it the next year. That's the way government operates, but there's no incentive, whereas if you work for a private business and you save $1 million, your employer will give you a bonus. I mean, that's what you're supposed to be doing, is maximizing your service and minimizing your costs. But nothing happens that way in government. So we lurch from deadline to deadline. We've got another deadline that'll be coming up in a few months. It's going to be called the debt ceiling. Now, some people say, well, why can't y'all get along, hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and make everything fine? Well, there is a struggle. There's always been a struggle in debate in democracy, and we've had it since the beginning. Adams and Jefferson hated each other often. I mean, there really has a vigorous debate isn't a problem. So we should kind of get over the fact that we do have disagreements, and we really you should struggle for what you believe in. But the debt ceiling's coming up. So the debt ceiling is where we raise and so we can borrow more. My point has been there's no objective evidence that they're doing a good job with the money we've given them. I can't see giving them any more money. Now the president's going to say, well, you've already spent the money. You have to pay for things you've already spent. Well, we're really not going to pay for things we've already spent. We're going to add it to the deficit. We raise the debt ceiling, and we raise the debt ceiling so we can pay the interest. Nobody's paying the principal. So when he says, oh, you have to pay for things you spent, yeah, that'd be great, but we're not going to pay for any of this. We're just going to add it onto the tab. We have over $16 trillion tab. It's going up to $18 trillion if the president gets what he wants. I have said the only way I'll vote to raise the debt ceiling is if we have meaningful reform. What do I mean by that? Stronger rules. A balanced budget amendment to the Constitution is the only way I'll raise the debt ceiling, because they just can't be trusted. The last time we did the debt ceiling was about 1.5 years ago, and we passed new rules, statutory caps, legislation that says you can't spend above a certain level. They just exceeded anyway. They can break their rules any time. We're supposed to have a budget every year. We haven't had a budget in 3 years. They just break their rules. And then when we raise a budget point of order, the majority just votes to override it. The joke up there is that if the majority deems it so, they can deem that day is really night. Just takes a majority vote. You can say anything you want. So I made a point of order not too long ago that they hadn't posted the bill. We have a Senate rule that says it has to be posted 48 hours online. So I raised my hand and said this, was been online for 6 hours. And I just got the bill 2 minutes ago. And they just voted me down. 77 of them voted to deem that it 6 hours was really 48 hours. So when the fiscal cliff deal came up, they procrastinated. You know when we got the bill? 1:36 a.m. in the morning. You know when we voted on it? 1:39 a.m. in the morning. And I never saw the printed version. And it may have existed. It's supposed to by law exist, but I don't think I ever saw the printed edition of it. May have gone online, but for 3 minutes before we voted it. So this is your government. Your government is dysfunctional. But it really also is dysfunctional in a way because people want things, but they don't necessarily want to pay for them. And this is a problem. I mean, I'm all for low taxes, but I'm also willing to give up some of the things. We have to be able to look at the things that we all want. As a society, we've decided we want Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. These are the three big entitlements. We may not want everybody on Medicaid. I don't want everybody on Medicaid. I want only those who can't take care of themselves on Medicaid, or temporarily for those who need some assistance. Medicare and Social Security, the reason they're not working is we don't pay enough for them. Social Security spends more than it brings in. It's been going on for about 2 years. And you might say, well, Harry Reid told me there's $2 trillion surplus for those 40 years that it brought in more money than you spent. It did. But what they did is they spent the money anyway. It was spent in the general fund. And what they replace it with is over at the Social Security office, there's a stack of paper. These are treasury bills, but they're non-negotiable. They're only redeemable by taxing the next generation. So you say, well, why don't we just tax the next generation? The problem is this next generation is smaller than the previous one, which is smaller than the previous one. Problem is we have this huge baby boom population getting ready to retire. And I said, look, the problem with entitlements is not Republicans, it's not Democrats, it's your grandparents for not having enough kids. If they'd have had more kids, for having too many kids, actually. Now it's your parents for not having enough kids and you for not having enough kids. But the problem's not going away. Medicare, we pay $1 in taxes for every $3 in benefits. Over your working career, the average person will pay a little over $100,000 in Medicare taxes, but the average person in retirement collects over $300,000. The math just doesn't add up. We're $35 to $40 trillion short in Medicare. We're about $6 trillion short in Social Security. They can be fixed. I sat right across from the president over a year ago and said, look, you can fix them. You have to just gradually let the age of eligibility go up. Now, it's not a gift. I'm not coming to you saying it's going to be great. It wouldn't affect the current people, but the next generation, my generation, would have to wait. If you do it at 2 or 3 months every year, it probably has to go to 70. And you say, well, I don't want that. Well, if you don't want that, your other alternatives to keep the situation we have, just keep borrowing, which is really a problem and will destroy our currency, or you can raise your taxes. But in order to pay for Social Security as it is, in order to pay for Medicare as it is, you might have a payroll tax of like 20% for the employee and 20% for the employer. That'll kill the economy and it'll kill individuals. So, try asking the guy who makes $28,000 a year if they can give up 20% on their payroll tax. You can't do it. It'll cripple people. But we'd have to raise taxes to pay for it. We've got to raise the age of eligibility to delay people getting it. And the other thing we can do is means test it. If you've been successful in your career, you get a couple $100 less in your Social Security check, and that works also. Same way with Medicare. You pay more in your premiums for Medicare if you've been successful. And you have a graduated scheme. All of these things will fix it. But here's the other problem. The AARP comes to Washington. They don't want any reform. They're adamantly opposed to any reform of this. And they are an enormous organization, enormously powerful, and they mail stuff to my constituents all the time saying, he's going to take away your Social Security, write him a letter, he's going to cut your Social Security. Nobody wants to do any of these things, but we don't want to destroy the country, by spending money we don't have. We've got to do something. The budget is 2/3 entitlements and interest. It's growing so rapidly that I tell people who come to see me, whether you're a conservative or a liberal, Republican or Democrat, if you want something from your federal government, it's being squeezed out by entitlements. So if you're a liberal and you think government should do all of this for people who are having trouble, you have to fix entitlements too, because there's no money left for all of these liberal projects. If you're a conservative and you think the military needs more money, you have to fix entitlements too. Everybody has to, because there's no money left over. What happens when you borrow to this extent and you print so much money? You can destroy the currency completely. It happened to Germany in the 20s. They destroyed their currency. The money became so worthless they burned it for fuel. They took it around in wheelbarrows. It became so worthless that workers wanted to be paid twice a day because the money would be worth less by the end of the day. We can't go on this way forever. Something will have to happen. I think personally there's not enough backbone and spine in Washington to ever make it better. That's why I think we need stronger rules. Jefferson lamented that we didn't make part of our Constitution that you can't run anything other than a balanced budget. So what would happen if we didn't raise the debt ceiling? If I won and we didn't raise it, would default be a good idea, not paying interest on your bonds? Now, I think it's a terrible idea, and in fact, I would like to take that off the table. But it's a political game that's played. The president says, oh, you're going to roil the markets, you're going to cause this catastrophe in the stock market by not raising the debt ceiling. Well, if you promised that you weren't going to default, you wouldn't. We bring in each month over $200 billion in tax revenue. The interest payment's about $30 billion. There's plenty of tax revenue to default. If the president were a leader, he would say, we are not going to default. We have plenty of money whether the debt ceiling goes up or not. But they don't say that because they always want the debt ceiling to go up. If your debt ceiling didn't go up, what would that mean? You'd start running a balanced budget immediately. Now, it would be difficult. But what we have is a bill that we're going to give to the president, if we can get it passed, that would tell him, pay the interest on the debt, pay the Social Security checks, pay for Medicare, pay for your soldiers' salaries in the war effort, and then everything else has to be brought back down to a level until you make some permanent changes. If we were willing to go through the deadline, I think we could force him to do that. The question is whether or not we, in the Republican side or in the conservative side, have the ability and the wherewithal to actually force him to do it. I think we could get some meaningful change. But ultimately, it is going to mean that we change entitlements or reform entitlements for the future. It's not a pleasant thing. Nobody's jumping up and down saying, oh, please, please, let me wait 5 more years. Let me work 5 more years to get my check. It would be done, though, on the younger people. It wouldn't be done on those who are 63 or 65 or 60. Really, most of the proposals have been in the 50s on downwards. These things are fixable. We can. Ultimately, you have to do some of that, which is sort of austerity, which nobody likes. But the other half of that is there's less need for austerity if you have a growing economy. If we were growing at 3 or 4% right now, there'd be less pressure on all this because more revenue would be coming in. But we have to decide, and this is a decision we make every year when we elect people, is do we want people who just want to punish those who are successful, or do we want to elect people who are pro-business and realize that to be for me to be in favor of the business owner who is here, it means I'm also in favor of the people they employ. And we're all interconnected. When we realize that, when we realize that being pro-business is the way to help everybody, to help the middle class, to help those who need a job and want to get a job, when we realize that capitalism is the most humanitarian system ever, when we realize that capitalism, our country, the great wealth we have, is from our system. It's a system of profit and loss where people every day, every employer in here has to look at a payroll. You have to meet your payroll. You have to have enough profit left either for you or for your investors. These are the things that make it great. And it's one of the things when we think about who should do something, private business or government, we think about, who's more efficient at it. Friedman had a good way of putting this. He says, nobody spends someone else's money as wisely or frugally as you spend your own. That's why if you give me $1 trillion and say, why don't you run the cable networking company and all this, I won't make as good of decisions because I don't have to report to stockholders. It's not my money, so I don't make as good a decision. That's why you don't want government running business, because they're just not very good at it. I tell people it's not that government officials are stupid, although it's a debatable question. It's just that they don't get the same signals that you and I get. The businesses get signals and have to be efficient on a day-to-day basis. We have to realize that there's an efficiency argument for small government, but there's also a liberty argument. The more you pay in taxes, which is your labor, the less free you are. For every ounce of government you get, you give up an ounce of freedom. That doesn't mean we're against government. We have to have government. We've got to have roads. We've got to have a judicial system. There's a lot of government that we have to have. Enforcement of property rights. All these things are important. So it's not that I'm arguing for no government, but I'm arguing that there's a liberty reason as well as an efficiency reason for minimizing government. And when you minimize government, you maximize business. The other way I tell people to think about this is that when people are talking about taxes, when they're talking about raising taxes, think in Washington, are they doing things that seem to be useful for your community? Or if you have let's say $10 million is going from Pikeville to Washington, would it be better if the $10 million remained here or went to Washington? Obviously, it's going to chase goods in your community if it's here in your community. So we should only have as much government as Washington as we absolutely need, and we leave more money among the people. And then you say, well, what if rich people have it? That's really not the business of government to figure out who among you, what your salaries are, and punish you based on how successful you are. It's here in the community. It'll be spent, and we're all interconnected, and it goes to those who work the hardest. But we need to be proud of that system. If we are, I think we'll thrive again. But we really are in danger of getting to a breaking point where the country really cannot withstand the debt that we have. We're getting closer and closer each day to this day, and it'll be a day of reckoning. So what I say is participate, be aware. It's not over since the election's over. Anybody that's connected to the coal industry knows this president will do whatever he can to cripple the coal industry. Doesn't have to be legislation. He just said this week, and he's done executive orders before regarding the coal industry, he said this week with regard to the Second Amendment, he's going to do whatever it takes, whether he has to do it through executive order or not. My response is we didn't elect a king, we don't want a king, that's why we fought a war. But that's what his modus is. His modus is he will do anything and everything regardless of the approval of the Congress. This is a real problem, and I would say the same thing if it were Republican too. This is a kind of arrogance of power that we can't tolerate in our country, and we have to be very careful of this. So I'm one for watching them, making sure that they do not do this, and at every point that we can, trying to oppose this usurpation of power. Did anybody see the sheriff over in Jackson County on Greta last night? I called him on the way over. He did a great job because he got up there and said that they're going to have to come talk to him in his county before they issue an executive order taking away his guns in his county. He also mentioned that sometimes in rural counties, and this is true, it might take 20 minutes. Right now, if we call the police, it might take them 2 minutes to get here, but if someone had concealed carry, I'd feel better about them taking a couple shots at a shooter that comes in here while we're waiting the 2 minutes. But what if you're 25 minutes out in the county, and it's going to take 25 minutes for someone to come to your school? We don't have to have armed guards at all of our schools, but if you've got a teacher that wants to have concealed carry, by all means let them do it, or a principal. You think of Virginia Tech, and it's not perfect. People still are going to die in a terrible murder spree like this. But you imagine Virginia Tech took like 30 some odd minutes if one professor had concealed carry and a gun in their drawer. Now, is it the end? Are guns dangerous? Yeah, we should lock our guns up. We need to be very careful with guns and kids or guns and unstable people. But we can't give up on our right to own guns, and we can't let the president do it without any legislative authority just by him signing his name and saying he's going to do this. So these are the things we continue to fight. We're going to continue to fight cap and trade, the backdoor approach, which is basically him once again writing his own executive order to do whatever he wants. But the battle's not over. The battle continues. I think it's important enough, we've had a great enough country that I will continue to fight those battles, and I really appreciate you letting me come down to speak with you today. Thank you.
The senator's going to take a couple questions if anybody has any questions for him.
As long as they're easy questions, no hard questions.
Got one right here.
Senator Bob, I'm a big fan of yours. I really, what you believe in, I stand for too. But I got a business here. We got about 20 employees, and I hired a guy back in August, and in probably September, he has to learn our routes. We're in a water business, and we do routes. He started probably about 2 weeks working on his own, and I started him out, I pay about $100 a day, and 1.5% gross sales, and we paid once a month. But he called me in my office and asked for a raise. I said, "What do you want, Doug? You just started working, 2 weeks." I said, "It's kind of early." And he said, "Well," I was getting $1,000 a month food stamps. He has 4 kids. And he said, they cut me down to $200 and some. But I feel as a business, I'm competing against the government. And maybe, I don't know how you feel about that or what you think, but to me, that's just not right. And
You know, I think what we have to do is recognize that we're going to have a government that has some role in helping people who can't help themselves or in having a temporary transition for those who don't have a job. But one, we need to make sure it's temporary. We need to make sure that any kind of permanent or, you know, we're now extending unemployment up to 99 weeks. What that does is it extends and keeps the unemployment rate high. The longer you have it, the longer you have unemployment, the shorter the unemployment benefits are there, more it's paid for, but also the quicker people get back to work. But I think that those who are able-bodied and who are working, there needs to be significant restrictions on what you're receiving in order to get you to work. You find that so many of the farmers, when you talk to them, not so much here, but in other parts of the state, they'll tell you they can't get anybody other than immigrants to work because the Americans are receiving. And if they're receiving, they're not willing to work. And they force the farmers to put ads in the paper trying to get Americans to work, and which is, they think, a waste of money because no one ever answers the ads. But the government forces them to do it before they can hire a migrant worker. So, yeah, we have to change our ways. The one thing that I think Republicans and Democrats alike could probably agree to are work requirements for receiving anything. If you had to work and make sure the work is significant, make sure it's not in an air-conditioned office where you're doing the work, where it's significant and it's hard work, and you have an incentive to go look for the job that has air conditioning. You know, I'm a big believer in sort of work requirements for all of these things. But you're right, it becomes a disincentive. There is a certain break point on income where it's better not to work than it is to work.
I feel like the government's telling him, you know, if you don't make $200 a day, Doug, just don't work. We'll take care of it.
Yeah, and that's a problem. The problem is when you get right down to it, though, and you want to change those numbers, you're seen as being heartless because that person will have to work now. But the way I look at it is, you know, I've been working since I was a kid. I worked putting plants in, putting roofs on buildings and houses. You know, I've worked in the sun, I've mowed yards, I've worked manual labor, and I worked hard in school so I wouldn't have to, but there's nothing wrong with it. What I can say is that I always felt better about myself working, and the problem with having so many people receiving is you do lose your self-esteem. You do lose what is important about you as an individual, and it's hard to describe exactly what this is, but there is something that is very important about work, and it's what we as Republicans have to figure out as far as presenting a message is that instead of telling the person on food stamps they're a bad person or the person on unemployment that they're a bad person, we need to say that's not who we are. What we're trying to say is we want you to have a job. We don't want to give you enough handouts to kind of keep you here and to keep you down. We want to actually give you a job that brings you and makes you feel better about yourself and gives you the opportunity to move into the middle class. And I think most people on the receiving end, people in my family have been on the receiving end. I mean, they're not bad people. They've just struggled, and we need to show empathy for those people, but at the same time, we need to try to convince those people that we're trying to get them a real job, a job where they can feel good about themselves and enter into the middle class.
Other questions?
Senator, would you explain your position on industrial hemp and also the status of the bill that was filed regarding that, I guess, this week?
Yeah. Hemp is a plant that once upon a time was widely grown in Kentucky. It was originally grown and made for rope. So if you know anybody who was in the Navy back in the 40s or whatever, all the ropes were made out of hemp. Hemp can be used in clothing. I actually have a shirt made out of hemp. I don't have it on today, but I have a shirt made out of hemp. Not made in the United States because we've been banning it for 50 years now. The reason hemp is banned is because it looks like marijuana. It's in the same family as marijuana. So law enforcement has said, oh, we don't want it out there. It'll confuse us on marijuana. It can be made into clothes. It can be burned as a fuel. It can be made into paper. It's a weed. It's easy to grow. It's grown differently than marijuana as far as what I'm told. You grow it close together so you have large, thick stalks, whereas marijuana you want to grow farther apart so it has big leaves. I don't think it would be too hard in a modern era to give people permits for growing hemp. And then what it would do is we have GPS and stuff. You could tell your local sheriff there are 3 people growing it legally in Pike County, and here's where they are, and here's the GPS coordinates. You could fly over and find out. The other argument, people say, oh, people will hide their marijuana in the hemp fields. What I'm told is that marijuana cross-reacts and cross-breeds with the hemp because they're very close genetically. and it dilutes the potency of marijuana. So illegal growers of marijuana, my understanding is, would not have an incentive to grow it amidst hemp. Plus, the hemp people will have a permit. They will be regular farmers. They will have to get a permit from the state. But it would dilute the potency of the marijuana, so marijuana growers, they don't think, will grow it with hemp. There's some significant businesses here. They take the seeds from hemp and they make soap out of them. We have a hemp commission that's been set up. I'm a supporter of this, so is Jamie Comer. The hemp commission, I gave a donation to it from my political action committee, and also this guy that makes soap, I think, matched it with $50,000. He has a multi-million-dollar business, but he has to import all of his stuff. See, it's legal in almost every other civilized nation. So what we're doing is basically saying we can't grow something that we used to be very good at, and it would be a brand new crop. There is no such thing as a hemp crop in the United States. If Kentucky becomes a leader on this, if our legislature would pass this, we would be the first state doing this. And there may be some conflict with the federal government, but I think right now that they would probably, I have a bill in Washington that would actually give us the right to do it, and then Jamie Comer and the legislature is pushing one in Frankfurt. There is a bill that's been written. As far as whether it's introduced or when it'll be voted on, I don't know. If you can talk to your local law enforcement people and try to convince them to get on board, I've talked to several sheriffs who are thinking about it more in favor of it now, but we have to get law enforcement on board. As long as they're officially saying, oh, it's going to cause us a trouble with marijuana, it's going to be hard to do. But I really think in this modern, and plus I'm not sure, what if 200 people want to grow it? How hard would it be to have 200 permits and have a GPS coordinate for where they're growing it? I really think we could police it, but it opens up a whole new market, a whole new agricultural market. And one thing I read which was fascinating about this is that for an acre of hemp versus an acre of trees, an acre of hemp will produce twice as much paper as an acre of trees. Trees take 15 years to grow for paper. Hemp takes 1 season. It could be an amazing thing if we could actually start growing it here again. And I think there's a way it could be, everything has an answer. Talking about problem solving, this is just a problem. Let's figure out how to do it, and then Kentucky could become one of the leaders on it. But I think we will get a vote in the next month or so in Frankfurt.
We have time for one more question. I got one over here at the end. Should have had 2 microphones.
Regarding Obama and the executive orders, how do you, as the Congress, stop him from becoming a dictator?
It's been an ongoing problem, and it really isn't just Democrats. Republicans have abused this too. There are thousands upon thousands of these things. I consider that we have abdicated our duty because really one of the beautiful things about our system was there were supposed to be checks and balances in the legislative branch between House and Senate and the President, but also judiciary ruling on whether things were constitutional or not. I think a Supreme Court case could strike down constitutionality of executive orders. There may be a role for an executive order. For example, let's say we're under a nuclear attack or a terrorist explosion. There is a need at certain times for specific orders. But even if that happened, like when Pearl Harbor happened, within 24 hours, Congress voted on war with Japan. There's no reason why. See, I think really if the president says even there's an emergency within a period of time, we should still vote on them. I think they all should be voted on. But we got away from this, and we've let it happen. It would take strong leadership in Congress. If you had strong Senate and House leadership, you could pass legislation and try to control his executive orders. If he denied that, then you'd set yourself up for a Supreme Court case, and I think we could do it. The problem is that many in Congress are pretty easygoing with this and have been for Republicans and Democrats. And for me, I can honestly tell you it's not a partisan thing. The President and I don't get along that well, but I can promise you if this were President Bush and he did issue some executive orders I disagree with, I would fight him as well. Thanks for having me.
We greatly appreciate the Senator's presence with us here today. I appreciate everyone's attendance here today. Remember, we have 2 events coming up with the Town Hall Forum, January 31st, and Lieutenant Governor Jerry Abramson on February 4th. So I appreciate it, and God bless and have a great day. Thank you.